So our next speaker then will be Laura Seidel, who's the Senior Vice President and Director of the Mid-South region of Seedco, and they are a grantee partner of the Women's Foundation for a Greater Memphis. Laura?
Seedco, for those of you who don't know us. We're a national nonprofit organization, actually what's called an intermediary, and we were founded in 1986. Our mission is all about creating economic opportunities for low-income and disadvantaged workers and communities. The way we work is a little bit different than a typical intermediary. We actually manage networks of community organizations and focus on delivering services at scale. Our primary areas of focus are workforce development and human services. The reason that we always work with community organizations is that we really believe that local organizations are the best at providing services to their residents. And we want to enhance their capacity and work with them to be able to provide services at scale. You'll see from the map that we have a whole bunch of offices around the country. Our corporate headquarters are actually in New York City. But the second biggest office is in Memphis, Tennessee, where I'm located, and where we have, at the moment, a very large workforce program for TANF recipients in Shelby County, about 10,000. Our office covers the whole Mid-South region. Other work we do in addition to this work with TANF recipients is we run a local earned benefits program, which is a national program that helps low-income workers access all the benefits they need but have difficulty accessing, like food stamps and low-cost health care and community resources. And then we also focus on issues related to home ownership. So we run a local home ownership counseling network comprised of local community development corporations, and we also have a foreclosure prevention program. If anyone's interested in learning more about Seedco or more about the program Earned Benefits that I mentioned, you can go to our website, www.seedco.org, or www.earnedbenefits.org, where you can learn more about that Earned Benefits program. I'm going to shift to talk a little bit about the barriers low-income women face in terms of accessing education and training. And I think those of us in the field know that there's a whole long list of barriers these women face. But I wanted to focus on what I think the biggest barriers are, as well as some that aren't talked about as much. So one area that we really struggle with when working with low-income women is the lack of high school diploma and GED. And we know this presents so many barriers. Some education and training programs won't allow you to enter if you don't have a high school diploma or GED. Many employers have this as a requirement, and I think it's increasingly the case in this economy that folks without these credentials, often can't even get into the door of their first job. Another barrier that we find challenging are the non-traditional hours that are required by many employers. So, for example, in the Shelby County region, we have wonderful companies like FedEx that offer good jobs that start at decent wages with good benefits, but they're often at very inconvenient hours. They're late at night or in the middle of the night. And for women, particularly single women with children, this is a big barrier that we face. And then there's also a group of what I would call psychological barriers, which are things that I think really challenge some of the low-income women in terms of moving forward. One is a focus on short-term versus long-term thinking. And what I mean by this is that many women will come to our program and they're survivors. They know how to make it through this week. They know how to make it through this month. They're very creative about their finances and resources, but they haven't really looked at a longer-term plan, even a year plan, let alone kind of a 3-year plan. And so getting someone to invest and really focus on education and training and career paths really takes a mindset shift from thinking about that short-term survival to that longer-term planning and success. We also find that many of the women have a real lack of awareness of what kind of opportunities are really out there for them. We find that folks are kind of thinking that they can get a job in the fast food industry or maybe as an office assistant. And we know that the fast food industry in many cases is not going to offer them the career path that they need. And there's not really many jobs for office assistants anymore, and even those that are available are often out of reach for many of the women we work with. Another barrier is the lack of experience, so that even when we can successfully get women through a good training program or get them their educational credentials, if they don't have the work experience, they may not get in the door of the better companies. And as with the GED, I think this is increasingly a barrier for us and for the women we work with. And then finally, I would say a big barrier surrounds the employers. And so there's always been issues around employers and maybe the stigma of welfare recipients, et cetera. But I think now the challenge is many of the companies are so lean and strapped in terms of their human resources that they're really challenged by any employee that may have any additional needs. And so we've found that we need to really focus more on preparing the employer as well as preparing the employee. So I've given a long list of barriers, but I would say that even in the midst of all these barriers and the midst of the economic recession we're in, we're still having a lot of success in placing thousands of women in jobs. And I credit some of that to a model we developed. We call it the integrated sector model. And the sectors we're focused on now in Shelby County are the retail hospitality sector, the logistics sector, and we're just starting to get into the green technology sector. And you'll see just looking at this model that it's comprised of some of the components that you're familiar with, if you're familiar with workforce models: assessment, job readiness, education, internship, and employment. But I think it's our approach and how we integrate the TANF requirements into that that make it really interesting and successful. So let me just take a minute and walk you through how the model works and what's unique about it. Starting with the assessment. Remember I said that one of the barriers that women face is the short-term versus long-term thinking. So we try and attack this right away. As soon as someone comes into our program, they're really introduced to sectors and they're assessed for their aptitude in particular sectors. So one example of this is we have a really fabulous partnership with the National Retail Federation in New York. And we work with them to use their customer service assessment tool to assess right away when people come in our program who might be successful in the retail customer service sector. And that's really an eye-opener for many women. Some who may think that they'd be really good in that sector find out that they may not be. And others who just never really considered that as a possibility or never really thought about retail or customer service as a career or a long-term job path get really excited by the fact that they are testing well and really have a good aptitude and promise for customer service. So just using the customer service sector as a sample of how this works, someone who really does well in the customer service assessment will often move on to what we call contextualized job readiness.